Hey, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining. It's another episode of the Squash New Zealand podcast or webinar series. I haven't got a name for this, but I'm thinking of calling it Handout. So if you're keen on that name, let me know. Or if you've got a better name, let me know as well. But this is where we take you behind the scenes of squash in New Zealand. I'm your host, Jason Fletcher, or better known around this community as Fletch. And today, special guest and a good old mate and flatmate, but we won't talk about those days. Because it's probably a different podcast and a different audience that we need to speak to about those times. But he's probably the country's leading referee, if not one in the world, Glenn Carson. Evening, Glenn. Welcome to the show, and how are you going?
Yeah, evening, Fletch. No, I'm going really good, thank you. And thanks for having me on the podcast tonight. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about refereeing.
No, great to have you. And I know we've talked about this for a while and talked about some of these topics that we're going to talk about tonight. But first of all, tell us a bit about how you got started in squash and then go on to, first of all, why did you start refereeing and why and what got you interested in refereeing in the first place, and then your journey about to where you got to probably.
Yeah, I guess I first got involved, played as a very young, probably 5 or 6 year old, taken down to midweek ladies with mum when she was playing at the Mana Club in Wellington. Sort of moved on from that, moved to Palmerston North when I was about 10, thereabouts. Started playing the juniors days, and I was no different to any other sort of kids jumping on the court at any opportunity, even if it was only for 3 hits in between matches at a tournament or whatever. So it sort of went on and junior club nights and junior tournaments, and I played for Central in juniors all the way through juniors, which I guess is where we first met, Fletch. And on to playing for Central for a reasonable length of time as well. So that's what got me into squash. And I guess refereeing wise, I always had an interest. Even did some refereeing at some events in the 90s. Joss Urban was a early influence. Joss was a Squash New Zealand director of refereeing in those days. I think she always thought I had potential as a referee and was always keen to encourage me to do that, but still playing some competitive squash. I wasn't that interested in pursuing refereeing as a pastime. So I guess you get to a certain age and realise that I wasn't going to make it as a player, and all my playing days at the level I did get to was coming to an end. So I decided to sit my national badge, and it was just a really good way of staying engaged with the game at a high level, giving back a little bit to the game. It had been pretty good to me with playing lots of events around the country, and I guess I never really had aspirations about going to the very top of refereeing until I got a taste of a few international events. And it was only then that I really appreciated the opportunities that presented. So that sort of got me on the journey after a few events. But I guess the main sort of catalyst for when I decided to do it was actually a well-known squash personality that inadvertently convinced me to take the plunge, which was Gary Dougley. So Gary, I only played him once in my career, and was in a Cousin Shield 3rd and 4th playoff match. And after promptly losing to Gary, we had to referee the next match on the adjacent court, which was the final. And I think it was Remuera versus Titirangi, I think, from memory. Scott Harrison versus Josh Tom. So a real classic old bull, young bull matchup. And I don't recall who was winning, but one had to win the match to win the Cousin Shield for his team, and the other had to win to keep it alive and force it to a fifth match. So Gary saw them warming up, and immediately ran to the markers board and grabbed the board and sat down and looked at me and said, "I'm marking this one." So I sort of took on the challenge and quite enjoyed the experience. It was a tough match. Went full 5 games in the balance right to the end. Don't ask me who won. I haven't got that good a memory, but I do recall people coming up to me afterwards and sort of saying, "Oh, well done on refereeing that match. I thought you did a really good job." And to have people from both sides of the match making comments like that was sort of got me thinking, and thought to myself, "Oh, maybe I should sit my national badge," which was the year after that. I decided to do just that. So that's how I sort of got into squash and into refereeing.
Oh, well, I suppose the big difference is Doobs are still playing and you're not. And I suppose I'll be able to give him a hard time about that when I see him next. But I suppose if anybody out there is not happy with your refereeing, they can blame Doobs for having you making the calls.
Yeah, look, still playing a little bit, mostly doubles, mostly very, very social. And did see Doobs play the other weekend at the Auckland Open. Still playing a pretty good game of squash, and singles at that level doesn't get any easier the older you get, that's for sure. So yeah, hats off to Doobs for still sticking in there.
Yeah, no, it's funny how these things happen, and being able to put back into the game, I think, is great. I was never going to crack it as a player, so I ended up coaching. So, but it's great to still be involved, because I wouldn't be involved as much if I wasn't doing that, involved with the coaching and coach development. So,
yeah, absolutely.
It's great to be able to put something back, and referees very thankless as well. So you've got involved. Doobs made you referee. You got some feedback, and so you decided to get on the pathway. But there need to be some steps, obviously, to keep moving along and keep getting better. What did you do to keep developing yourself as a referee?
Yeah, look, I guess lucky enough after that qualifying as a national referee, sort of came on the radar of a Australian WSF, World Squash Federation referee and assessor, who came out here to do some assessment of our referees, and obviously showed a little bit of potential. So was invited to attend the Australian Open in 2011. So Squash New Zealand were very supportive of that, and got over there, able to sort of rub shoulders with some very, very good referees, some of which are still at the top of the game now. So getting that exposure to top level squash and top level officiating was really, really important. Mentors and coaches, you talk about your coaching, Fletch, and having someone to bounce ideas off and that sort of thing is really, really valuable. So here in New Zealand, we're very lucky. Joss Urban, mentioned earlier, was a Squash New Zealand director of refereeing for a long time early on. She's always been something of a mentor to me and a real support. People like Peter Heisted, who retired a few years ago, Chris Buckland, who's still active these days, both very good mentors when I was starting out. The appraisal process is a really valuable learning tool, as is self-reflection. So, I'm no different to other referees. We're constantly reviewing our own performances, just as a player would do, and always asking myself, what could I do better or differently to handle a certain situation or match? Because, as I said, you learn every time you referee. So really important just to bank those learnings and try not to repeat the same mistakes, and just try and get better all the time. It's going back to when I first qualified, we had a Australian WSF ref assessor over, and we've had assessors from Australia over a few times. Yeah, so getting the chance to be assessed by that top level was a real development tool, and it really helped me to learn and get to high levels.
So I'll just jump in there, Glenn. So you talked about the assessment, because a lot of us, if we go back to our school days and we actually get assessed, and it's a little bit nerve-wracking and it can be challenging for a lot of people. I know some spaces I work in when we assess coaches, and sometimes your performance isn't what it normally is. But you also talked about reflection. So how did that assessment process help your self-reflection, and how do you go about sort of being comfortable with that process?
Yeah, I guess the first thing, you've got to sort of park your ego at the door a lot of the time, because assessor will tell you when they think you're wrong, and and squash is the sort of game that any given situation you can have one of three decisions, and at times any one of those three can be very little in between what is right and what is wrong. So yeah, the little nuggets of gold are the bits of feedback around how you handled a situation, or how you reviewed, or how you looked at a certain situation, and the trends an assessor will see in your decision making. Because the key thing is, obviously, it's consistency. That's all the players want. If a line has been taken which is pretty tough on the no let, then they just want to see that applied fairly to every situation like that. So there's no flip-flopping between tough calls and slightly easier calls. So yeah, it's just getting that feedback from the really experienced assessors is really helpful in your development.
Yeah, I remember way back learning to play and referee and all the rest of it, and I remember the comments were always, as long as you're consistent. And
Yeah,
people sort of joke whether it's good or bad, but yeah, the consistency is probably a key thing, and probably as you develop, getting better with the consistency as well was probably a key thing, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. People may or may not realise, but there's a error rate that's considered sort of acceptable even at the highest levels of the game. So there's a proportion of calls that it's acceptable to get wrong, and still be regarded as performing at standard for those high level matches. And you only have to watch PSA TV to see very good referees get overruled. Not lots of times, but it definitely happens. So everybody makes mistakes. That's the reality of it.
What about so you mentioned practice? Get some games under your belt, and if we keep running for the marking board, I suppose we're not going to get much practice.
Yeah.
So you sort of got there by accident in some ways, but if we are willing to develop our refereeing skills, being comfortable enough taking that referee seat, I suppose, one thing. But also trying to get to some events if you will play some competitions, so you do have to mark and ref on occasions. What are some of the events that you've been able to get to learn as well?
Luckily enough, not long after I first qualified as the national referee, sort of came to the attention of Australian WSF assessors, and that sort of facilitated an invite over to a couple of Australian Opens, which was a great opportunity to rub shoulders with a number of WSF referees and assessors over there. Learned a lot in a really short period of time, and that was probably about when, as I mentioned, I realised that had a little bit of ability to referee, and it might be worth pursuing that and just seeing how far I could go. Not really realising that in 2 or 3 years' time from there, I'd get enough assessment to reach WSF accreditation. Which I think at the time I was on that panel, it was sort of one of 20 worldwide at that level. So that was a real an achievement I didn't think possible probably 2 or 3 years earlier. It's interesting what you're saying about, running for the marking board, because, I've long sort of maintained, and you'll know what I'm talking about as a coach, that having a really good understanding of the rules can only help you as a player to understand rulings and understand what how a referee would look at things, but also avoid getting the wrong side of decisions, which you do see some players consistently on the wrong side of those decisions, and a lot of the time it's not bad luck or bad refereeing. It's because they're consistently doing the wrong thing. So it can only help your development as a player, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think what you feel or down on the court is actually quite different what the referee sees. And I think I recall a couple of times when we've been recording stuff for coaching and players complaining about the decision going one way or the other, and having the ability to watch it later on, and you think, well, actually, you were lucky there, you got away with that one. So you shouldn't have been quite so critical. I've heard plenty of players in the showers complaining about the referees costing them a game, but actually not considering how many tins they hit throughout the match, or how many times they made a mistake or hit a loose ball. So the players do have to take some responsibilities, I believe, as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you've had some great opportunities, but I know with our players trying to make their way, there's some challenges being based in New Zealand. And what have been some of the challenges that you've had to overcome or face, trying to sort of make it, but also stay there?
Yeah, I guess the biggest one is being in New Zealand. We're so far away from the majority of the tour. Majority of the events are a long way away, so it's expensive to get to. And now on top of that, there's we're essentially volunteers, taking leave without pay, to go to these events, which is not too bad when you are appointed. They cover your travel costs and they cover your accommodation and an allowance, daily allowance. But when you're trying to get to that level, they're not. So getting to those events is challenging. Squash TV is a great way to learn and get up to date or keep up to date with current trends in refereeing, but that doesn't replace being in the hot seat. And the more you do, the better you get. It's like anything you practice. Practice really does make perfect. So it's still effective for me even now. There's not many events in this part of the world. Obviously, New Zealand Open last year was just fantastic to get that back on the calendar for a whole lot of reasons, refereeing included. But there are not many events down this part of the world, and it's just not realistic to expect events on the other side of the world to appoint me when there are other referees who are much closer and more cost effective to the for their event. COVID was obviously a pretty big challenge for everybody. No events for a little while anywhere in the world, and when they did start up again, we couldn't travel because of lockdowns here. So I had to turn down a number of opportunities to get to some good events overseas. At the same time, no one could come here, so the lower level sort of PSA 5 and 10K events that we were building up quite a bit of momentum through sort of 2018, 2019. They all came to a halt in 2020. So there wasn't even the local stuff at that level to practice on. So I personally found it a massive challenge going to the Birmingham Games, which you can see behind me, the court behind me. Found that quite challenging, as going there as one of the more senior referees. Yet it didn't really dawn on me, but I hadn't actually been at an event at that level for almost 4 years at that stage. So I might have looked calm and in control on the surface, but if you know the analogy of a duck on water, which is nice and placid on top, but paddling like anything underneath, well, that was me on that glass court, trying to stay in control. I guess that said, I was pretty happy with how the event went. To get 2 gold medal matches far exceeded my expectations, and my only regret is that I'd rather have been watching Joelle play for the gold medal than be the referee for the women's final.
I'm pretty sure she'll agree with you too on that one, and she'll be back in both her and Paul will be back in the country this week for New Zealand Champs coming up. So should be pleased to hear you say that too, I'd imagine. But interesting to say, I remember talking to you a while ago, and you were a bit worried not being able to travel, that you might lose your accreditation or your ranking, so you wouldn't get invited to these events. And I think you said you actually got some invites, but because of it just wasn't practical because of the quarantine, getting back into the country and that sort of stuff.
That's right.
So being out of it does actually a bit like playing. If you haven't played for a while, sometimes you're not too sure about your next match and that sort of thing. And really interesting because I think we all feel like when we get a big match to referee, regardless of the level, we're the duck on the water with the legs.
Look, and that's exactly what I was sort of going through, even at Birmingham. It's like, I haven't been here for 4 years. What if I'm no good anymore? Or you run the risk of being off the radar of the PSA or WSF at that level. You run the risk of being sort of forgotten about. And there were some referees that came up through the ranks in the UK, the likes of Andrea Santa Maria, Jason Foster, who weren't active as a referee when I was last at events, and they came up through the system and were at all sorts of events all over the world, and both of them very, very good referees. And it's just that risk of you're unavailable, you're off the radar, the game moves on without you. So look, just really good to get to that event and perform well enough to get some of those good matches and stay relevant to the powers that be in refereeing land. So it was really pleasing from that point of view.
Now, well done, and it was great to see you. And I suppose cameras are right on you too, so the whole world, everybody that's interested, that's watching, will see you either sink or swim, I suppose, in that situation. So I'm going to ask you, Glenn, because you're really nervous about being there and having to make the calls and things like that on one of the biggest stages for squash, especially for our players and referees. How did you sort of keep yourself calm? What were some of the things you did to keep yourself calm, if anything?
Oh, gee, you don't really calm down until you get the first sort of call or two out of the way. So I guess you're just trying to tell yourself to breathe and not get too tense, and just try and relax. Mentally, just trying to keep the mind clear. I like to just try and focus on simple things that are happening in the game, and just look at the movement of the players, even when there's nothing happening. Just keep an eye on what they're prepared to go around and hit, and what they're so that when situations do happen, what they've been doing previously in those situations, and if they do something different, it's a bit of a clue as to what your decision might be. So it's really just trying to pick something to focus on, and focus on that to keep the mind busy from thinking about, gee, I hope I don't stuff up, sort of thing. So it's a reasonably simple approach, but I think it worked for me, just to keep myself in the moment and present. And I've always found that helps me to get into the match. And then once you get a few calls under your belt, things tend to calm down.
Great stuff. Yeah, it's actually interesting to hear you say that you actually sort of basically really watching the players and watching the game, watching what's happening, looking to see what's happening. That sort of helps you settle into the game. Like players are probably, those first few rallies are generally sort of the players finding their feet, I should say, and trying to build their way into the game as well. So basically building a bit of rhythm.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Just getting for the feel for the game, and what might be happening, because you'll get subtle clues, and you're also looking to see what situations where they are prepared to stop and ask, and you'll get a sense of, are they actually trying to play the ball, or are they looking for that opportunity to call a let and those sorts of things. So really important to watch all the time, not just when there's a decision to be made.
So getting some of these opportunities, Glenn, sort of, you talked about sort of having to take leave and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Are there any opportunities? Squash New Zealand don't have a lot of money, but are there any other opportunities to get funding to get to some of these things, or help develop?
Yeah,
the ones that are
there are some streams out there. We've been fortunate through myself personally, as well as the refereeing fraternity, to get funding from High Performance Sport New Zealand. So they do a series of they're called Prime Minister's scholarships. So that's a fund that you can apply to. It covers athletes as well as administrators and officials. So we've been really lucky with Squash New Zealand's support to apply for and get funding there. So that funding helped me to get to the likes of the Australian Open when I was first starting out. It got me to Hong Kong for Hong Kong Open when I was chasing WSF assessments. So and it's also funded bringing WSF assessors from Australia out to here. So without that, it would have been very difficult to get both the level of play and the level of assessment required to achieve that WSF status back in 2015. So there's some added benefits as well to that, because bringing a WSF assessor across, getting them to two or three tournaments here, good opportunities for those assessors to assess our other referees as well as just me. So really good benefit just to refereeing in general from that funding and the ability to bring people out.
Yeah, I think we're lucky enough currently to have some funding from that. I think there's 3 of the referees that have they'll be able to get access to that, which my role sort of looking after referees at the moment. There's an opportunity for a couple of the referees to go to Malaysia later in the year, so it's definitely creates some opportunities that wouldn't have been there otherwise, or be self-funded. So I think it's unfortunately we're not in the big sports, and any bit of money helps, isn't it?
Yeah, it certainly does. Yeah.
Before we went to air, actually, we talked about the. I'm going to jump into being the assessor. So you assess some referees as well, and with the game refereeing being subjective, what are you looking for when you're assessing the referees?
Yeah, I guess you mentioned it before, and I mentioned it as well. Consistency is obviously the big thing. I guess first of all, you are looking at, and I like to call it the "can I live with it" test. So a referee might give a decision, and it might be a yes let, and I might be preferring a stroke or a no let or whatever. But I'm looking for, can I live with what the referee has said? That's the first sort of test, because quite often a decision can have 2 correct answers depending on the situation. So it wasn't that long ago, John Mazzarella gave me a quote that I have remembered word for word to this day. It was a number of years ago, but his bit of advice was that there can be different decisions for the same situation in different matches. So that takes a bit of unpacking, because there's a bit of detail in there, but basically what he was saying is a let for a situation in one match which is really clean without anything happening can easily be justifiable as a no let if you're trying to alter the behaviour or the actions of one or the other of the players. So and there's plenty of times where as an assessor you'll look at a situation and say, gee, I'd I'd like a no-let there, but in the context of this match, a let's fine. Or another match, you might be saying, there's 4 situations that are all very similar. And let's just say it's on swing. If they've given 4 strokes on swing, even if the margin for the swing stroke is a little bit wider than I'd like, then I'm probably not going to say they're incorrect. I might say I'm living with it, but you might want to consider, this much room's a let and that much room's a stroke. So it's an opportunity to give a bit of feedback around how a referee can improve their performance and go towards those higher levels, because it is a fact and a reality that the higher grade referees are giving a much higher percentage of strokes and no-lets than the lower grade referees. That's been reasonably well proven with data from Squash Referee app that they use on the PSA Tour. When they look at the top WSF referees, their let percentage is well down on what, say, national grade referee is.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? Because if I look back at some old footage of the 90s, and I'm not too sure if the rules have changed, but definitely interpretations have changed, haven't they?
Sure. Yeah.
Especially at that highest level.
So
you sort of covered. You sort of talked a bit about the philosophy, but you can go a little bit deeper with that and just, I suppose, do the PSA sort of direct that, or is it World Squash that direct?
Yeah, look, it's
the
PSA. It's PSA who direct that. The rules of squash are the rules of squash as published by WSF. Certainly the PSA influence the interpretation of the rule, which is a little bit different at the highest level compared to club level. So I would say about 2010, around about that sort of time, I would have said 60% of all decisions were lets, maybe 20% no lets and 20% strokes, roughly that sort of percentage. From about that 2010, 11, 12 onwards, the interpretations really changed around what PSA wanted the game referee. They wanted to get rid of the soft let, and they wanted to get rid of too many stoppages, which affect the watchability of their product, which is pro squash. So that's over time has resulted in a split of more like a third let, a third yes lets, a third no lets, and a third strokes. So soft lets were definitely discouraged, and while minimal interference had been in the rules for quite a while, even at that point, there was still way too many lets for interference that players should and could and should play through. So the game really went through a phase in that time of really targeting the incoming player and giving lots of no lets, requiring the incoming player to make much greater effort to get to and play the ball. So a lot more no lets were given. Unfortunately, when you take that approach, it's like anything. The old unintended consequences come in. Players might feel obliged to not clear quite so well if the referee's in a mode to give lots of no lets. So there was a perception that player movement deteriorated under that interpretation, and probably around 2017, 16, 17, there was another sort of subtle swing to really scrutinise the outgoing player to make sure they were providing that unobstructed direct line to the ball that the rules still say you must give as a player, as a striker. This is where things can get a bit murky, because direct access and making effort to the ball can sort of be at cross purposes, especially when the line to the ball means taking a line a little bit around an opponent. So always have to keep in mind that you've got two players occupying the same space, moving at high speed. So interference is going to happen. It's inevitable from time to time. And sometimes it's nobody's fault. So in my opinion, we're never ever going to get rid of the simple yes let. It's there's always going to be those situations where either both players are making trying to do the right thing. So one's trying to clear, the other's trying to go to the ball, and they just collide, and that's what we refer to as traffic, and that sometimes happens. Conversely, you get both players doing the wrong thing. So you've got one player not clearing the ball properly and the other player leaping into the back. And that's also traffic, but those ones are a bit harder to rule on, because you might give it a let the first time and you might even give it a let the second time. But giving lets for those situations over and over and over isn't going to solve the problem. Sooner or later, you've got to try and figure out someone who's more at fault and give a decision that influences that action, really. So really good idea if you're going to do that, to give a warning for that.
So I can imagine that being quite tricky. Both players are in the wrong and trying to work out, well, who am I going to give a warning to? Because I know sometimes, even from playing, you're not too sure if the player's going inside or outside.
Yep.
And sometimes you feel they're going on the outside, so you try and clear on the inside, but they've come in the inside. And so sometimes that getting in the player's way is accidental as well, isn't it? So that's
correct. Yeah. Hence why I say it gets murky, because you don't really know what the player's intent is. And sometimes you've got to make a decision on what you think their intent is. If you think their intent is to do the right thing, then it makes it really easy to justify the let. But if you think they're doing the wrong thing, then it's easier to make that call to effectively penalise them for that. But it is always a good idea, if you've given a couple of lets in those situations and you're going to change, give them some warning. Give the old yes let but I need to see you go to the ball more, not to him, which is setting it up the next time it happens to say, no let, I gave you the warning before, look for the ball.
What about, I know we've talked about this before too, Glenn, when you're trying to make yourself smaller, so you actually haven't moved anywhere, but you just tried to make yourself skinnier, which these days for me is impossible, but but just trying to make yourself skinnier, which is that deemed clearing the ball?
Look, at the highest level, sometimes it can be, especially when it all depends on the shot. If the depth of the shot means that just doing this is enough to allow a path beside you, if it's short enough, then that can be just enough movement to give a direct line, so to speak. So just like a very subtle shimmy to one side might not look very much, but it can be enough to completely block out the incoming player. So really subtle movements can be the difference between no lets and strokes, and it really is that tricky to rule on some of those situations, that there is very little between a no let and a stroke on some decisions.
I suppose, especially when it happens so quickly too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So a lot of people seeing the stuff online, PSA TV, seeing the refereeing decisions, watching the bigger tournaments locally, and the referee decisions and the approach to at that top higher level.
Yeah.
What about down the levels? When your club referees are, especially in the lower grades, do you think the same philosophy should be used, or do you look at it slightly differently?
Yeah, look, I think the philosophy still stays the same. It might just be the extremes that might vary depending on those levels. So I think, first and foremost, what you're looking for is a fair outcome for every rally. So if someone's playing outside of those rules and they're not refereed like that, then they're getting an unfair advantage. So that's the reason why a fair outcome for each rally is the goal. So the philosophies around clearing the ball, making every effort to go and play the ball, are exactly the same. It's just those margins that need adjusting. So, for example, on say swing or front wall type interference, a top pro with the ball control they have, both of where he's hitting his shot and his swing, he can be expected to play a lot more shots than say your average C grader. So for that reason, you might see no lets given to a PSA player, but that situation would clearly be a let for a C grader because there's a greater risk of injury. Safety being the other paramount concern, as well as that fair outcome. So, those are the things that you'd probably just adjust a little bit in terms of those lower grades. Is the margin, the safety lets, I guess the required effort to go and get the ball shouldn't be worlds different at that at the lower levels. You can't just lean into a player and expect a let. You've still got to be making a genuine effort to get past any interference and play the ball. It's just the more extreme calls you're not going to see at the sort of below B grade sort of level.
Yep. Yeah, I think it's for people that are think about this here, the safety is probably going to be the first thing. Would it be safe for them to play that shot? And obviously, if there's a bit of doubt there, let should be played.
And I guess when you're starting out as a referee, it's okay to be unsure. There's plenty of situations where, as a referee in a big match, you aren't sure, and that does lead to that's what leads to overalls, because you're sitting there thinking, gee, I can see a potential for a stroke there, or it's a no let. In the end, you can't decide which one's more at fault. So you go down the middle and say yes let, and you see it on review and get to watch it slow and 3 or 4 times, and you actually realise it was actually a stroke or whatever. So that's that challenge around the instant decision making. You've really only got 2 or 3 seconds to process the situation and get a decision out. Or do the old hospital pass in those events to the video referee, but you don't get that luxury down at your local tournament to throw to a video referee. So I guess the message is it's okay to be unsure, and if you're unsure, giving a yes let's probably not the worst outcome that you could get.
Yeah, it's and as you get more experience, like you say, you'll get more better feel of what calls. Which way they should go. Actually, just talking about the video referee, because it's a relatively new thing for squash, and many other sports have had that for a while. And what's it like being behind the camera and making decisions, both on review and also when you've been thrown the hospital pass to make the initial call?
Yeah, look, it's different, and you would think, gee, with the ability to watch it 2 or 3 times, you couldn't help but get it right. But it's not always that easy, to be honest. So it's a different sort of skill set than refereeing, and not as easy as it looks. Often, the more you look at a decision, the more confused you can get. You can sort of start seeing things, and you've always got that pressure of trying to get that decision out quick enough that it doesn't delay the game too much. So you've got, if we're watching it 4, 5, 6 times, you've just about got the producer in your ear saying, hurry up and make a decision. So while the time pressure is not the same, you can't just watch it over and over and over and take too long. There is a finite time limit to how long you've got to make that decision. So but it does give you the opportunity to see things slower, see things multiple times from different angles, and that's probably the real value of it, particularly some of those decisions where you're trying to assess whether there's a line to go maybe in front, and they're very hard to make those calls from the back. as a referee. Same as with swing interference, where it's really difficult to pick the lateral distance between the players and that sort of dimension. So quite tricky to get those right. And the overhead camera is a godsend for that, because you see straight away that there's 2 meters between them. There's plenty of room to swing that. So yeah, easier in some ways and harder in others, I guess, is the summary.
Or even seeing the commentators disagree when they're watching the replays on what should be what, or they back the initial decision or think it should be overruled. So even watching lots of squash at that level, commentating on it, it's still not black and white, is it? So that's a bit of a challenge.
Absolutely not. No.
So I've got a question for you around that, because when you are the video ref, where do you sit?
So we're usually at the back somewhere, away from the court, so we haven't actually got a view of the court, not often. In a room somewhere, or in a cordoned off part of the venue, usually right beside the commentators, which adds a dynamic to it that it's hard not to hear what they're saying, and you've really got to try and block that out and not get influenced by what they might be saying about it. Sometimes you're very close to them, sometimes you're a bit further away. Luckily enough, at the New Zealand Open in November last year, we had a bit of distance, but it's not always like that. So sometimes you can hear exactly what they're saying, and sometimes that's reassuring if they're saying exactly what I'm thinking. But there's been times where they're saying things and I'm going, I'm not seeing that. So that's another sort of challenge of that job that makes it a bit more difficult at times.
I can imagine you have some interesting discussions afterwards with the commentators, especially Lee Drews, and he's in charge of the referees.
Yeah. Look, with those events, we're always meeting after the day's play or the next morning, and Lee often has a number of clips he wants to go through of decisions that he's flagged during the day's play. Sometimes it could be that he really liked the way a referee dealt with certain situations and he wants to highlight that, and other times he might want to he might disagree with the decision, and we'll have a really good debate about the merits of that situation, that decision. So but it's always proactive, and it's always about learning and how do we get better. That's what the focus is.
I suppose the benefits, a lot of matches are now streamed. So if you are, say, on the referee pathway and looking to do some self-reflection and things like that, I suppose you can watch matches that you've refereed, and you can almost referee it again if you like, I suppose, can't you, to see actually, now I've seen that again, would I call differently or not? But it's another tool that we've got now that you can do some self-reflection like we can with coaches and players.
Yeah, absolutely. And just like players will review their matches, referees do. I know I do. I will go back and rewatch it with exactly that focus. If I was in the chair again, would I do the same thing, or what would I do differently? And it even goes, it's not just about the calls, it's also about what you might have said at a certain time or didn't say, and trying to get those learnings to say, well, I tried to give them the message to go to the ball, and I didn't quite get the words out right. So now, what would I have said if I had that time again? What would I have said differently? And you only get better at that. It's the hardest part of the game. The decision making, while it's not easy, it's the easier part. It's being able to explain and articulate in as fewer words as possible the reasons for your decision and what the player might want to do differently to avoid that same decision happening again. That's the softer skills, the match management skills, which are a lot harder to master.
Thanks for that. So it's really good, because I'm thinking it's not easy, because not many sports that I know of that the referee actually sits either amongst the crowd, whether it's half a dozen and you've got 3 on one side and 3 on the other, or amongst a few hundred where you the Commonwealth Games, or probably even worse in in a very parochial crowd in Egypt, could be imagined quite challenging. And I suppose I'm going to ask you for a few tips for our people out there that do find themselves in the hot seat. With a lot of districts are now either in Super Champs or about to have them, and quite often one side you've got one group saying that what a great call, ref, and the other side they're asking if you've been to Specsavers, and it could be a good sponsor for our referee panel. I'll have to run that past them and see if we can get them on board. But I suppose we'll get some tips off here. But one that comes to mind, you've made a howler, you've made a wrong call. How should you deal with that from then on?
Yeah, look, good question, because I've certainly been there. I can think of some decisions that as soon as they come out of your mouth, it's wrong. Look, you've really just got to put it behind you. I've had players sort of demanding an explanation, and you really haven't got one. So you've really just got to try and get them to get on with it as soon as you can. Pick yourself back up again and put it behind you, really, and don't dwell on it. You dwell on it, chances are you're possibly going to make another one. So it's really just about being that mental strength to put it behind you and refocus on the game, and try like hell not to make that same mistake again. But that's part of the whole skill and challenge of it, is that you are going to make mistakes. It's just effective refereeing that you're going to get some things wrong, because there's just at times too much happening to get every situation right.
Yeah, and I suppose try and be consistent, but if you haven't made a bad call, actually try and make, in the same situation, try to make the right call next time around, isn't it? So
yeah, look, and I've seen some players sort of disarm those situations by admitting a mistake, where if they've given a stroke for 1 minute, and then a let, and said, oh, that was the same as that situation. I've seen referees say, hey, maybe I got the last one wrong, and owning their mistake, in a sort of light-hearted way. But you just never know how a player's going to react to that. So it might not be a great plan, but you certainly don't want to perpetuate the mistake and keep making that same mistake to be consistent. If you get one wrong, then you still go ahead and give the right decision from that point forward. And if a player wants to talk to you about it afterwards, that's probably the time to say, I got it wrong. And I think a player will respect that, because, like you said earlier, Fletch, players quick to blame the referee for a bad call, but forget about the 4 tins they hit in the game, which cost them even more. So I think they respect the fact that you're human enough to say, I got that wrong.
Yeah, and I think actually it's a responsibility as players too, regardless what the level is. Because at some point you might have to be in that hot seat as well, and making a decision that may not be correct. So yes, sometimes you've got to feel for the people up top. You want the best decisions that you can get, but also bear in mind that you might have your turn up there shortly, and you'll be in the hot seat and might have some difficult calls to make also. So I think if players can take on that responsibility and remember that, particularly at tournaments, and you get some young people or new people to the game too, I think is a big responsibility for players. If they realise they've got some people that are new to the game refereeing, actually bear that in mind and respond appropriately, I think, to encourage those people to keep involved.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, everyone can be an armchair critic, but it would be much better if people took on the challenge and put themselves in referees' shoes from time to time to realise it's actually not that easy. So maybe they would take it a bit easier once they realise that.
Yeah, I've seen it a few times at Saturday morning sport around the place, and there's lots of advice from the sideline. I've seen the odd person go and take the whistle over to somebody that's been got all the advice, but they're not too keen to take the whistle. So
correct. Yeah.
yes. So when it's your turn, it's it's not nice to be on the receiving end, because we are trying our best, aren't we? I suppose that's the key.
Yeah, look, and that is right. I mean, certainly, I've never met a referee who is bigger than the game or is doing it for any other reason than the love of the game. And they're all squash lovers or squash treasures, if you want to call us that. But everyone does it because of love of the game. So it's certainly not for the money. It's certainly not for the glamour. It's very much a love of the game thing.
Yeah, well, they're great tips. Thanks, Glenn. So, sort of, so there's a bit of a part. So you've talked a bit about your pathway. So, what advice have you got for those that are keen to get on the pathway and pursue refereeing a little bit further?
Yeah, I guess there's a great resource now with the WSO, so the World Squash Officiating website. So it's a collaboration between PSA and WSF. The aim's to standardise training and appraisal of refereeing worldwide, so that a level 3 referee here in New Zealand is trained with the same resources and to the same standard and is at the same ability, whether they're here in New Zealand or in the UK or anywhere else in the world. So it's a great way of developing a pathway, which has been sadly lacking in the last few years, from entry level right through to the pinnacle level of the sport. So the site has great resources, printed resources with FAQs and marking sheets and activity forms, injury rule summaries, all sorts of resources on there. But the most useful resource will be the video library. So they've been built up from clips over the last few years at PSA events. They're all categorized into the type of decisions. So there's strokes, there's no lets, there's yes lets. There's different interference situations, so swing, front wall, access, etc. And they've all been reviewed by a panel of top referees to determine what the correct decision is. They also include a description of why that decision is correct. So great resource to learn a bit about the game, and that those video clips are used randomly in the assessment materials for each level. So there's a learning module for every one of the levels, 0 through to 5, and an assessment that you must pass before moving on. From about level 2 onwards, and I'll explain the level shortly, there is a practical component, so an appraisal component to pass to be that level of referee. So essentially the level 0 is essentially a rules knowledge, and that's free. So there's no charge for that at all. Anyone can log onto that, do that, sit the assessment and pass as a level 0 referee. Level 1 is regarded as club level, and those who've been around Squash New Zealand for a while will recall our club exam, which I think we used to make, we'll probably still make compulsory for Super Champs, which is coming up, Fletch.
Yes, yeah. So I think, So we'll, if you haven't done it, you'll need to do it. So just a reminder for people out there.
Yep. So the level 1 is sort of the equivalent to the club exam. Now there is a cost for that. That's $15 US. Then which is pretty cheap when you consider all the resources that are available on that site, and you start to get a qualification which enables you to build on that and go as far up that ladder as you want to go. So level 2 is equivalent to our old district referee level. That's $25 US, and then level 3, which is the equivalent to our national referee, which is $50 US. Now that's not 50 on top of 25 on top of 15. It's 50 total. So you pay your 50 and they refund you your 25 for the previous. So it's really just a nominal admin fee to cover the probably not insignificant cost of building the whole platform, which if you jump onto it, you'll see what I mean. There's a lot of resources on there. So that goes all the way up to level 4, which is the old regional, Oceania regional, or USA or Europe regional level, and then level 5, which is world referee. Squash New Zealand will pay that fee for you when you achieve level 3, national referee. So that was decided a year or two ago. So if you get to that level, that is funded. Yes, if you have got interest in that and you're not quite sure where to start, feel free to reach out to any national referee in district. They'll be aware of the process, the pathway, or Mike Jack, who's our Squash New Zealand Director of Refereeing. Anyone on that panel or in that group would be more than happy to help you get started. And look, I guess the beauty of the WSO site is you can go as far as you like, depending on what your goals are, whether it's just to understand the rules a bit better, to be a better referee at Super Champs or a better referee at Interclub, or just have confidence when you are thrust into that hot seat, or whether you aspire to be a referee at the top of the game. You can jump into that pathway and go wherever you want to go with it.
Yeah, thanks, Glenn, on that rundown, and I'll better check to make sure there's enough budget there for all these people that now want to become national referees, so we can pay for their
You'll find it. You'll find it, mate.
Subscription. I think we are looking to try and put the club one that's currently on the website onto our Squash Smart website as well, so people can do it through that platform as well. Thanks for that, Glenn. That sort of gives a good rundown of that process. And is that an annual fee or just a one-off?
I think it is an annual fee. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. No, definitely not cheap to maintain and keep upgrading the platform. So, a question from PK around the level 1. I think that's what we're going to put. That's the club one, isn't it? So, yeah, that's the club exam, which has probably been on the website. So you're probably right there, PK. And that's the one we're looking to put on the Squash Smart. Swap over to Squash Smart so people can access it through there. I think John Fletcher, my at Squash NZ, is trying to set that up now.
Yeah, and Janet's just confirmed that. So I think you're right. That is the case. You can go to level 1. Yes. Brett's got a question there as well. So consistency. What if you reflect and you got it wrong and move forward? So yeah, look, if you reflect and you know you've got it wrong, you definitely don't perpetuate that mistake and keep calling that situation wrong under the theory of being consistent. So, you give the right call, even though you may have made a mistake. I know that makes you look inconsistent, but you've got to give the right outcome after that error. Even if you're being assessed, yep. Because it's only going to be one error. If you keep giving the wrong decision, it'll be multiple errors.
Is he asking a question for his next assessment that you're doing, Glenn?
I think he might be, yeah. Yeah. It's all right. This is being recorded, so I'll be able to go back and see the questions being asked, so I can lock that away.
Yep, Mike confirming, the level 0 and level 1, no fee.
Thanks, PK.
Okay, if there's so no final questions or comments. Hey, Squash TV commentators often well off the mark, which gives bad rap, I suppose, is it? Bad skew, yeah. So that can influence what people see and how they view things, and it's especially on social media, people are keen to share their views as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess that's part of the beauty of the game and the challenge that we face as referees, that it's so subjective, and that you could have a really difficult situation, throw it to 3 WSF referees and get 3 different answers. So, people's perception and people's opinion is exactly that. Sometimes I agree wholeheartedly with what the commentators are saying, and sometimes I don't. Who am I to say that I'm right and they're wrong? And I think that's one of the beauties of the game, that sometimes it doesn't exactly make it great to watch, but certainly makes it a lot diverse to the game, and it's certainly not bland and boring, and it does create some good talking points, and it actually creates good talking points within the referee fraternity for, hey, actually, what was the right approach to that situation? So I just look at those as great learning opportunities for getting better and better, and hopefully getting alignment, which is what WSO is supposed to trying to achieve, is get that alignment and referees all trained to the same standard and the same level. So easier said than done, but doesn't mean we'll stop trying.
Thanks, Glenn. We're always trying to do our best, regardless whether we're on the court playing, coaching players, or even in the referee's seat. And I think the beauty is that even though in coaching, that there'll be different views on how to do things. So one's not right or wrong; it's just a different approach, that sort of thing. Question here from Mike, actually. So the behaviour of players probably come up over recent weeks, actually, in holding players back and actually general behaviour, especially at the top level. I've seen a lot of that. How do you feel about it?
Am I allowed to say no comment? Look, anything that shows a player operating outside the rules to get an unfair advantage, I don't believe is good for the game. So probably won't comment on whether that those situations are deserved for that player or not. But I definitely don't think it's a good look for the game or individuals when they are caught on camera. I guess it's no different to foul play on the rugby field or other sports grounds. It's against the rules of the game, and it's outside the spirit of the game, and should be addressed by the referee team in the match if possible. That said, it's very, very hard to spot some of those things live. You need to be breaking it down in slow-mo just about to see some of those things. So unsurprising that some of those things went unnoticed in matches.
Yeah, some of it can be quite subtle too, can't it? So it's
absolutely, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Rightio. Well, I think we'll wrap it up there. So once again, thanks, Glenn, for your time. Thanks for everybody that joined in tonight to listen live. Thanks for coming along, and remember to send through a note on what we should call this. I think the first choice is first one on the table is handout. So if you like that, give it a thumbs up or a tick or something. But if you've got some other suggestions, please feel free to flick them through to me at jason@squashnz.co.nz, because we like to bring more of these sort of things to our squash community on a more so I'll use the referee term, more consistent basis. So if we can get one a month, I think be great, and to hear more from our coaches, referees, players about what's happening in the space. So Awesome.
Thanks,
so thank you for everybody.
Thanks for having me, Fletch.
No, great to have you. It was a good chat.
All right. We've
Cool.
enjoy your evening, everybody.